As I look through the Bible and understand God and his place in human history, I understand that God owns everything.
In 1877, the Second Colored Baptist Church was founded in Montgomery, Alabama, by a handful of members who withdrew from the Columbus Street Baptist Church. The congregation first met in the old slaveholding pens on Market Street. Later, when the street's name was changed to Dexter Avenue, the church became known as Dexter Avenue Baptist Church.
We would find our life filled with far less stress if we would get on God's agenda. Amen. Dexter was really just one of those unique phenomenons in American history. A church that was birthed in a slave trader's pen, held its first worship services there. And so to rise from an institution of bondage to become symbolic and synonymous with freedom and liberty is just one of those ironies of history.
In 1885, the present church building was erected on a prime lot 1 block from the state capitol, an opportunity provided by the Reconstruction era in Alabama. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church had begun to change. The church of the slave pens was becoming something quite different.
The Dexter Avenue Church was what people in the black community called a class African-American church.
Dexter was a very hoi polloi church that I think even the janitor had a college education.
I think certainly at one point it had a higher percentage of professional people than other churches in the Montgomery arena.
It was a church where there was structured worship. It was not a church where there was a tremendous amount of emotionalism. But it was, even though what the black community called a class church, a church that had been involved in the community.
By 1952, the pulpit at Dexter Avenue was vacant. The church's controversial pastor, Reverend Vernon Johns, had resigned under pressure.
And Johns had conducted almost a one-man crusade against injustice in the city. A black was killed in Montgomery, and he put on the marquee of the church that his sermon title was going to be, is it all right to kill, quote, a nigger, unquote, in Montgomery? A very fearless kind of man, but not a good pastor.
On January 17, 1954, the church invited a 25-year-old doctoral candidate from Boston University to preach a trial sermon. His name was Martin Luther King, Jr., son of the legendary pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta.
After going to Crozier Divinity School, he went to Boston University and got a PhD in theology and philosophy of religion. But it was highly unlikely that a young PhD theologian would end up in a church of 200 or 300 members like Dexter Avenue.
Deacon R.D. Nesbitt Sr. Discovered him and brought him to Montgomery for his first pulpit interview.
He was back there eating pork chops. That was his favorite dish. And I introduced myself to him and told him my mission. His daddy was still in the den. And his daddy said, Mike, you don't want to go to that big nigger church. They ain't going to do nothing but kick you out. Just like that. I said, oh, my goodness, why would he say that?
His daddy wanted him to stay here in Atlanta and be his assistant. And Ebenezer at that time had 3,000 or so members. But he wanted to be on his own.
I think it was interesting that Dr. King's visit to Montgomery and ultimately his pastorate here at Dexter was simply to lead a congregation and to be involved in perhaps an academic career. Certainly had no idea that he would end up leading an international movement.